No. No, it was not. Succession and Barry are both going to get their own videos in the future. They may get multiple because of how much there is to say about their respective series finales and the legacy of each show. However, I needed to get something out today because last night, Sunday, May 28th, 2023, was poised to be HBO's most monumental night in the history of its programming, an opportunity to close out its most acclaimed drama, arguably, of the 21st century, and its most acclaimed comedy, arguably, of the 21st century, in one night, in a 2-hour span. I mean, sure, for any other streaming service, for any other channel, it would seem unlikely, but given HBO, given the pedigree of these shows, it seemed attainable. And well, Succession did its part, and Barry didn't. There seems to be a growing case against the importance of sticking the landing in a TV show. That whatever happens in the final 30 minutes to an hour of a show, it really doesn't dramatically affect the show's overall quality or legacy. And in some respect, I agree with that assessment. I know, speaking from experience, whatever happens in Season 8, Episode 6 of Game of Thrones, it really didn't lessen my unabashed love for the series. What's unique about TV is that so much goodwill can be built up between the audience and the show that there can be some serious dramatic misfires in the final hour or last couple hours in a show, and you still will likely love it the same way. The caveat is that if a show messes up enough key things, if it feels like an entirely new beast in the autumn of its lifespan, then there's a rather high probability that viewers start to feel detached, that they have been repaid for all their hours and hours of watching the show and thinking about it with a bastardized statement on the characters and themes that they have engaged with for years. And that is enough to ruin a show. For me, a series finale needs to be good to great. There is a threshold to it. It can't just throw its arms up at the end and say, hey, well, whatever the show has been up to this point, that's what it is. I do think there is skin in the game. There is a chance a show can lose itself in that final hour and in some respect ruin what it has been. But I think that if it hits many of the key points that we want it to, it doesn't have to perfectly wrap up every single plot. There is room for error. And then there's just the situation where it nails everything, like in Succession. I really didn't want to make a whole video on how Succession stuck the landing where Barry didn't. These final episodes, these final seasons mean so much for their respective TV shows that to expend all my energy trying to draw comparisons and show how one's better just isn't worth anyone's time. But I think there is something useful to be learned about how Succession differed from Barry's series finale, but how it was also kind of similar. TV shows are weird, right? To me at least, because in the 21st century, what I see as a defining feature of the great TV shows is that they really want to deny the viewer what they want to happen. They want to set up comfort zones just to shatter them. They want to set up narrative expectations to go the most unconventional route possible and to forge a new path, which is so fascinating because you look at TV and it's supposed to be this comfort zone. You're supposed to sink into your chair and not have to feel the pain, the heartbreak of the real world. But that's all what the dramas of the 21st century want you to feel. And so the great struggle for them is, how do we hurt the viewer in some capacity that makes the show more profound without them thinking we're purposely being contrarian or being untruthful to the show? Without giving away too much, because I'm not trying to be spoilery here, Succession's finale was the pinnacle, to me, of finding just the right amount of hurt to put on the audience and using just the right amount of deception to make them think the show is going to be one thing when it's really another. There was a clear path set for this finale. There were two teams that were going to be facing off, and that would have made for a somewhat traditional series finale. It was a clear A versus B team, and that's not what we got. In the first 25 minutes, that expectation was eroded, and we got something entirely different, where the main antagonist, I guess you could say, the main villain of the episode, wasn't even there for the most monumental part of maybe the entire series, the climax of its 4-season run. That's a bold and dangerous call that, if executed poorly enough, could taint what you think of the show. But Succession, despite the fact that it's pivoting like a madman in its final hour and a half, it's never lifting its fingers off the pulse of the show. Like, it may be going up and down the arm, but it's never losing a vein. It would have been cool to see the battle we were quote-unquote promised, but at the same time, this path the show takes also doesn't feel contrarian, because it feels like one of the few narrative beats that would have actually delivered the show's final thesis successfully. The ending was cruel, but no more cruel than the Shakespearean plays the show was frequently modeled after, which keeps the ending from feeling unnecessarily mean-spirited. This was a finale with no true victor, no real sense of triumph to it, which is peculiar considering one person did win, but I seriously doubt that even if you pick the right horse in the race, that you feel any less cold than the other viewers do the morning after. Having a cold series finale is such a risky play because by the nature of the amount of time you spend with characters, you are practically willed into rooting for their success. However, because the finale was no more cynical and jaded than the show was throughout the entirety of its run, the tragedy here feels essential, not forced. The Barry series finale is risky and courageous in its own right, but just seemingly in all the wrong ways. The quality of a finale is not just determined by what happens during that time span, it's also about how the chess pieces are put into place beforehand. Succession's finale strategically bunches together characters whose fates have been intermingled in some way for the journey of the show. Seems like an obvious choice, right? Well, Barry doesn't do that. Every finale is a summation of final statements on the themes of the show, on the characters, and if you don't surround the characters with the right people when final statements on them are made, you're going to confuse the audience by permanently linking some characters to others that they had nothing to do with. And perhaps it may not be the brightest idea to link together characters in essentially their final scene who haven't been connected to each other for 2 entire seasons at this point. Characters that don't mean that much to each other shouldn't be set on a collision course right before the final stretch of the show because then they'll have to collide in ways that's going to feel especially unsatisfying to the audience. There is perhaps a reason why English teachers tell you not to add new points in your concluding paragraph, because you're trying to make a cohesive statement on an argument, on an idea. You're supposed to be summarizing at this point. You shouldn't be adding new ideas that confuse what you're trying to say, because it changes fundamentally what you're getting at. It is at the end of the paper, it is the last thing people will remember, and so if you add new things, they're going to get a mixed message from you about what you're trying to convey. And that's exactly what happens in Barry. It is likely not a great idea to cast a new shade on a character in the last hour and a half of the show's run, and then use that version of the character in the finale. What I think Succession understands is that there is still room for change in a series finale. We still are learning about the true nature of the characters, but whatever their true nature is, whatever choices they make, they should be informed by the character's body of work. Whatever decisions they're going with, they should be in some way reflective of who the character has been thus far. Are they learning from their mistakes? Are they repeating them? If you introduce an entirely new element that in some way does not tie back to who the character has been thus far, then you're going to end up with something nonsensical. That's how you end up with a liberator burning down a city of innocents. And that is not just nonsensical, that can ruin the entire show for some people. That's not what I think exactly happens with Barry, but I think it's kind of similar. A show makes so many statements during its run, it sets up so many laws and rules about how that world functions. Is it fair or not? It sets up so many conditions about the characters in the show that there are limits to the message a show is delivering. When you try and get too inventive, when you try and bend the limits of what that message can be, sometimes the message itself falls apart and you miss in that final episode what the show was really trying to get at. And to me, that's what Barry's final episode did to a T. Succession's finale felt like such an HBO success because it was HBO yet again counting on us rooting for the characters like we do every single time. The episode had the appearance of being radical, but it really just behaved like the show had the entire time. Barry's finale, meanwhile, attempts to be so inventive for a final episode and attempts to add so many pieces to the equation that it feels like it's not in any way a conclusive statement on the show itself. There's still so much more to say about these episodes, but the reason I think they're kind of a good comparison is that one is an example of a TV show that is denying you what you want to expect, but by not going so out of its way to accomplish that, it still behaves within the limits of the show and offers an ending that is painful, yet is so artful that you can't help but submit to the power of its message. The other is a finale that goes so far out of its way to defy expectations that it makes for a final statement that is not unsatisfying in the sense of, oh, they killed my favorite character type of unsatisfying, like a Game of Thrones thing, but an unsatisfying where, wow, that really didn't show me at all, that wasn't representative in the slightest of why I liked the show so much in the first place. I could not say this was HBO's best night ever because it was a tale of two different finales for me. They were both so audacious, but Succession's took calculated risks that prevented the show from being too clever for its own good, whereas Barry's spat so hard in the face of convention that it failed to really get any words out about Barry itself. Don't worry, there's plenty more that I'm going to say about these two series ending, so stay tuned. Lightspeed Brothers is going to have more videos on the way.